The red dust of Cedar Ridge hung in the air like a shroud, coating everything in its path with a fine layer of grit that turned the world sepia. It was the summer of 1880, and the frontier town sat baking under a merciless sun that had burned the grasslands to brittle straw. The purple mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks cutting into the evening sky like broken teeth, while the hot wind carried the scent of scorched earth and distant rain that never quite reached the valley. Sarah McKenna stood on the porch of her weathered cabin, one hand shading her eyes as she watched the horizon. The wood beneath her feet had been worn smooth by her late husband's boots that now sat empty by the door, gathering dust like everything else in this God-forsaken place. 3 months had passed since Sheriff Tom McKenna's death. 3 months since they'd brought his body back draped over his horse. 3 bullet holes telling a story nobody wanted to hear. The cabin sat on the outskirts of town, far enough that she could avoid the pitying looks and whispered conversations that followed her like tumbleweeds whenever she ventured into Cedar Ridge. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a leaking roof, and walls that groaned with every gust of wind. But it was hers, or at least, it would be if she could keep the vultures at bay. Sarah turned back inside, her worn calico dress brushing against the doorframe. The interior was sparse but clean, every surface scrubbed raw in those first weeks after Tom's death, when grief had driven her to attack dirt and disorder as if they were the enemies that had taken him. Now, exhaustion had settled into her bones, and she moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned to ration their strength. The evening chores couldn't wait. She pulled on Tom's old work gloves, the leather still holding the shape of his hands, and headed to the small corral behind the cabin. 2 scrawny chickens pecked at the barren ground, and her milk cow, Bessie, lowed mournfully from her pen. The fence needed mending again, the posts leaned drunkenly, held together more by habit than nails. As she worked, sweat trickling down her back despite the cooling evening air, Sarah heard the gossip that had reached her even in isolation. The women at church spoke in hushed tones when they thought she couldn't hear. "Poor thing," they'd say. "But you know what they say about a woman living alone. It ain't natural." The men were worse, their eyes following her with a calculating gleam, measuring her land, her livestock, her vulnerability. Old Martha, the minister's wife, had cornered her after Sunday service last week. "You ought to consider Mr. Randall's offer," she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern. "A young woman like you, all alone out there. It ain't safe, and people talk, you know." Samuel Randall. The thought of the rancher made Sarah's hands tighten on the hammer. He'd started circling the day after Tom's funeral, offering to help with the property, to take the burden off her delicate shoulders. His help came with strings attached, strings that would see her land absorbed into his growing empire and her relegated to, what? A kept woman. A servant in what had been her own home? The sun dipped lower, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Sarah paused in her work, watching the light play across the endless expanse of sage and sand. This was what Tom had loved, the vastness of it, the freedom. "Out here," he'd told her on their wedding night, "a person can be whatever they choose to be. The land don't care about your past, only what you're willing to give it." But Tom hadn't reckoned with how the land would receive his widow. A movement on the horizon caught her eye. A lone rider, still distant but moving steadily toward town. It wasn't unusual. Cedar Ridge sat on the main trail between Fort Worth and Santa Fe, but something about this rider made her pause. Maybe it was the way he sat his horse, straight-backed despite what must have been hours in the saddle. Maybe it was the black horse itself, a fine animal that stood out against the pale dust like a drop of ink on parchment. Sarah shook her head and returned to her work. Strangers came and went. They had nothing to do with her. By the time she'd finished with the fence, a temporary fix that would hold until she could afford proper supplies, darkness was creeping across the valley. She gathered the eggs, such as they were, and headed back inside. Dinner was a meager affair. Cornbread left over from yesterday, a bit of salt pork, and preserves she'd put up last fall when Tom was still alive and the future had seemed certain. She ate by lamplight, the silence broken only by the wind rattling the windows and the distant yip of coyotes. In town, the saloon would be warming up, piano music and laughter drifting on the night air. But that world felt as distant as the stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. After cleaning up, Sarah sat by the window with her mending. It was there, needle poised over a tear in her second-best dress, that she saw him again. The stranger had reached town, his black horse tied outside Murphy's saloon, even from a distance, even in the poor light spilling from the saloon windows. She could see he was different from the usual drifters and cowboys. He stood for a moment on the boardwalk, a tall figure in a long duster coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Then he turned, and for just a moment, Sarah could have sworn he looked directly at her cabin, though it was impossible he could see her in the darkness. A shiver ran down her spine. Though the night was warm, sleep came fitfully that night. Sarah dreamed of Tom, of his laughter and his steady hands, of the plans they'd made. But the dreams twisted, became nightmares of gunshots and blood, of faces hidden in shadow and debts that could never be paid. She woke to the rooster's crow and another day of blistering heat. As she went about her morning routine, feeding the animals, drawing water from the well that was running dangerously low, checking the fence that had already begun to sag again, her thoughts kept returning to the stranger. It was foolish, she told herself. Cedar Ridge saw dozens of travelers. This one was no different. But when she finally made her weekly trip to town for supplies, her heart beat a little faster as she approached the main street. The general store was busy. Ranchers' wives gossiping over bolts of fabric while their husbands discussed cattle prices by the pickle barrel. Conversation stuttered to a halt when Sarah entered, then resumed in lower tones. She kept her head high, moving through the store with practiced efficiency. Flour, coffee, a precious bit of sugar, lamp oil. Mr. Henderson tallied her purchases with obvious reluctance, as if her money might be tainted by widowhood. "That'll be $2.30, he said, not meeting her eyes. Sarah counted out the coins carefully. Money was running low, and the small amount Tom had saved wouldn't last much longer. She needed to find a way to make the land profitable, but a woman alone had few options. "Heard you had some trouble with your fence," a voice said behind her. She turned to find Samuel Randall, his bulk filling the doorway. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing I can't handle," Sarah replied, gathering her purchases. Now, no need for pride. We're neighbors, aren't we? I'd be happy to send some of my boys over to help." He stepped closer, and Sarah could smell the pomade in his hair, see the calculation in his gaze. "A woman shouldn't have to struggle alone. I manage fine, Mr. Randall. For now, maybe, but winter's coming, and that well of yours won't last forever. You ought to think about your future. Mrs. McKenna. Tom wouldn't want you to suffer out of stubbornness." The use of her husband's name made her jaw clench. "Tom would want me to keep what's ours." Randall's smile widened. "Yours? For how long? The bank note comes due in 6 months, unless you've found a way to make that scrubland turn a profit." He let the threat hang in the air. Sarah pushed past him, her packages clutched tight to her chest. Outside, she nearly collided with someone coming up the steps. "Pardon me, ma'am." The voice was low, gravelly, like it hadn't been used much. Sarah looked up into the face of the stranger, and her breath caught. His eyes were gray as winter sky, set in a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness etched into every line. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, white against sun-darkened skin. For a moment, they stood frozen, and Sarah felt something pass between them. Recognition, though they'd never met, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. Then Randall emerged from the store. Well, I heard we had a visitor. You'd be the one who rode in last night." The stranger's gaze flicked to Randall, then back to Sarah. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice, and hurried to her wagon. As she drove away, she could feel both men watching her, and she couldn't have said which gaze burned hotter. The dust followed her home, swirling in her wake like all the ghosts of choices not yet made. The stranger's name rippled through Cedar Ridge like wildfire through dry grass. Jake Coulter, even whispered. It carried weight, made men touch their guns reflexively, and women clutch their children closer. By noon, everyone knew an outlaw had come to town. Murphy's saloon hadn't seen such careful silence since the day they brought Sheriff McKenna's body back. The usual crowd hunched over their drinks, eyes darting to the corner table where Coulter sat alone, his back to the wall and his gun hand free. The piano player had given up after a few half-hearted tunes, and now the only sounds were the clink of glass and the creak of floorboards when someone shifted nervously. "Heard he killed 3 men in Amarillo," someone muttered. "5 in Denver," another corrected. "Law's been hunting him clear across 3 territories." Old Pete, the bartender, polished glasses with unusual vigor. He'd seen plenty of hard men pass through Cedar Ridge, but something about this one set his teeth on edge. Maybe it was the stillness, the way Coulter could sit for hours without moving, like a rattlesnake coiled in shade. Maybe it was those gray eyes that seemed to see everything while giving nothing away. The saloon doors swung open, bringing a blast of hot air and bright light. Samuel Randall entered with 2 of his ranch hands. The Burton brothers, thick-necked men who enjoyed their work a little too much. Randall's gaze swept the room, lingered on Coulter, then moved to the bar. "Whiskey," he ordered, loud enough to assert his presence. "The good stuff, Pete, not that rot gut you serve the rabble." Coulter didn't look up from his drink, but Pete noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed once against the scarred wood of the table. "Dangerous times," Randall continued, accepting his glass. "Man can't be too careful about the company a town keeps. Some folks bring trouble just by breathing." Still no response from the corner table. Randall's face reddened. He wasn't used to being ignored. "Course, we're a law-abiding town here. Sheriff McKenna saw to that. God rest his soul. Shame what happened to him. Left his pretty little wife all alone, trying to work that worthless piece of land." Now Coulter's eyes lifted, fixed on Randall with an intensity that made the rancher take an involuntary step back. "You know the widow McKenna?" Randall pressed, recovering his bluster. "Sweet thing, too proud for her own good, though needs a man's guidance." "Seems to me," Coulter said, his voice carrying despite its quiet tone. "A woman who can keep a place running after her man's death don't need much guidance." The saloon held its breath. Randall's hands flexed, but he didn't go for his gun. He wasn't stupid enough to draw on a man with Coulter's reputation, not without his full crew backing him. "You don't know how things work here. Stranger, this ain't no place for bleeding hearts or—" The doors burst open again. This time, it was Charlie Hapgood, one of the town drunks, dragging Sarah McKenna by the arm. Her basket of supplies had spilled across the boardwalk, and her face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Come on, pretty widow," Charlie slurred, weaving on his feet. "Just one little kiss. Your husband ain't gonna mind, seeing as he's feeding worms." Sarah wrenched her arm free. "Let go of me, Charlie. You're drunk. Not so drunk I can't see what you need." He lunged for her again, missed, and grabbed her shoulder hard enough to tear the fabric of her dress. The sound of a chair scraping back cut through the tension. Coulter moved with a speed that belied his earlier stillness. Crossing the room in 3 strides, his hand closed on Charlie's wrist, and there was a sound like dry kindling snapping. Charlie screamed, dropping to his knees. Coulter held him there for a moment, his expression never changing, then released him. The drunk cradled his wrist, sobbing. "The lady said no," Coulter stated simply. Sarah stood frozen, her torn dress held closed with one hand, eyes wide as she looked between Coulter and the whimpering man on the floor. The entire saloon watched, waiting to see what would happen next. "You all right, ma'am?" Coulter asked, not looking at her directly. Yes, thank you." Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You broke my wrist," Charlie wailed. "Be grateful that's all I broke." Coulter turned to Pete. "Get him to the dock, and maybe keep him away from ladies who ain't interested in his attention." Randall had recovered from his shock. "Now hold on just a minute. You can't just ride into our town and start what?" Coulter's gaze swung to him. "Stopping a man from forcing himself on a woman? That against the law in Cedar Ridge? Charlie's harmless. He's just drunk." "Harmless." Coulter repeated the word like it tasted bad. "That what you call it when a man puts hands on a woman who's told him no?" Sarah found her voice. "Mr. Hapgood has been asked repeatedly to leave me alone. The sheriff, my husband, warned him several times." "Well, your husband ain't here now." "Is he?" Randall said, his tone making it clear he thought that was convenient for everyone. "Maybe if you conducted yourself more properly, stayed home where you belong instead of parading around town." The sound of Coulter's gun clearing leather was like thunder in the confined space. He didn't point it at anyone, just held it loose at his side. But the message was clear. "I think you were just leaving," he said to Randall. For a moment, the rancher's pride warred with his survival instinct. Then he jerked his head at the Burton brothers. "Come on, boys. Air in here's gotten a mite too foul for my taste." They left, taking the injured Charlie with them. The saloon slowly returned to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Sarah remained standing in the doorway, seemingly unsure what to do next. "Your supplies, ma'am," Coulter said, holstering his gun and moving past her to gather the spilled goods from the boardwalk. She followed him out, kneeling to help despite her torn dress. Their hands brushed as they both reached for a tin of coffee, and Sarah pulled back as if burned. "I should thank you," she said quietly. "No need. Yes, there is. Not many men would have stepped in. Not for me." The bitterness in her voice made him look at her directly for the first time since the confrontation. Up close, he could see the exhaustion beneath her composed exterior, the way she held herself like someone expecting the next blow. Her hair, dark as molasses, had come loose from its pins, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. "Your husband was the sheriff." She nodded, gathering the last of her supplies and standing. "Tom McKenna. He died 3 months ago." "I'm sorry. Are you?" She studied him with eyes the color of sage honey. "Or are you just another one passing through, stirring up trouble before you move on?" "I don't generally stir trouble, ma'am. It just seems to find me." "Like it found you in Amarillo or Denver?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You've been listening to gossip. In a town like this, gossip is all we have." She shifted her basket to her other arm, wincing as the movement pulled at her torn sleeve. "I should go." "I'll walk you to your wagon." "That's not necessary." "Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway." They walked in silence down the dusty street. Sarah was acutely aware of the eyes watching from windows and doorways, could already hear the tongues wagging. The widow McKenna, taking up with an outlaw, as if she needed more fuel for the fire of their disapproval. Her wagon sat in front of the mercantile, the old mare drowsing in the heat. Coulter helped her load the supplies, his movements efficient and careful. When everything was secured, he stepped back. "You'll have trouble now," Sarah said. "Randall doesn't like being challenged. I've had trouble before. This is different. He owns half the valley, has the mayor and the banker in his pocket, and he wants—" She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "He wants your land," Coulter finished. "Among other things." The words came out harder than she'd intended. Coulter was quiet for a moment, then touched the brim of his hat again. "You take care, Mrs. McKenna." She climbed onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins. "Why did you do it? Really?" He looked up at her, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker behind those cold gray eyes. A memory, perhaps, or a ghost of his own. "Maybe I don't like seeing someone strong forced to their knees," he said quietly. "Maybe I think there's been enough of that in this world." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back toward the saloon, his duster swirling dust devils in his wake. Sarah watched him go, her heart doing strange things in her chest, then clicked to the mare and headed home. The ride back to her cabin felt longer than usual. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the torn sleeve flapped with each bump in the road. By the time she reached home, word would have spread through the entire town. The widow McKenna, defended by a killer, rescued like some helpless maiden in a dime novel. Except she didn't feel rescued. She felt unsettled, like the careful walls she'd built around herself since Tom's death had developed cracks, letting in light she wasn't sure she wanted to see by. As she unloaded her supplies in the fading afternoon light, Sarah couldn't shake the memory of Coulter's eyes, the controlled violence in his movements, the way he'd spoken about not wanting to see someone forced to their knees. What had he seen? What had been done to him? Or what had he done to others? And why? Lord help her. Did she want to know? The wind picked up as evening approached, rattling the loose boards and sending tumbleweeds racing across the yard. Sarah secured the animals and went inside, lighting the lamp against the gathering darkness. Through her window, she could see the lights of town beginning to flicker on, and she wondered where Jake Coulter was now, what shadows he carried with him into the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Randall wouldn't let the insult stand, and the town would close ranks against her even more. But tonight, for the first time in 3 months, Sarah McKenna didn't feel entirely alone. It was a dangerous feeling. She knew, perhaps more dangerous than all of Samuel Randall's threats combined. The night sky stretched endless above the desert, stars scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the darkness beyond her fence line, when she saw him, a shadow among shadows, motionless as the rocks themselves. Jake Coulter stood just beyond her property, far enough to be respectful, close enough to guard. The moonlight caught the silver of his gun belt, the only thing that betrayed his presence to her searching eyes. She should have been frightened. A known outlaw watching her home in the dead of night was cause for alarm, for barricading doors and loading Tom's old rifle. Instead, she felt something else entirely, a loosening of the constant tension that had lived between her shoulder blades since Tom's death. Wolves howled in the distant mountains, their voices carrying on the cool air. The sound usually made her check the locks twice, but tonight it seemed almost melodic, a wild song that spoke of freedom and loneliness in equal measure. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under her bare feet, and she saw Coulter's head turn slightly, acknowledging her presence. "Can't sleep either?" she called softly. He moved then, approaching with that peculiar grace that marked dangerous men, stopping at the bottom of her porch steps. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, the scar a silver line down his cheek. "Didn't mean to disturb you, ma'am." "You didn't?" She sat on the top step, arranging her nightgown and wrapper modestly. "Though I am curious why you're standing guard over a cabin that doesn't need guarding. Maybe it needs it more than you think." Sarah studied him. "Because of what happened today?" "Among other things." He shifted, and she caught sight of the rifle he carried, barrel pointed safely at the ground. "Randall's not the type to let an insult pass, and you're not the type to care about a stranger's troubles." "What makes you think you're a stranger?" The question hung between them like morning mist. Sarah felt her heart skip, but kept her voice steady. "We've never met before yesterday." "No," he agreed. "But I knew Tom McKenna. Rode with him once, years back, before he pinned on a badge." The revelation hit her like cold water. Tom never mentioned. Wouldn't have. It was during his wandering years, before he decided which side of the law he wanted to walk. Coulter's expression was unreadable. He was a good man, one of the few who was exactly what he seemed to be. "How did he die?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Really die? They told me it was bandits. But Tom knew these trails better than anyone. He wouldn't have been caught in an ambush unless someone set him up." Coulter finished. "You always suspected." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "The wounds were all in the back. Tom would never turn his back on danger. And his gun, it was still holstered. He knew his killer. Coulter was quiet for a long moment, then moved closer, settling on the bottom step. The distance between them was proper enough, but Sarah was acutely aware of his presence, the coiled power in his stillness. "Tell me about that night," he said. So she did. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. How Tom had received a message about rustlers hitting the Branson ranch. How he'd ridden out alone because his deputy was down with fever. How she'd begged him to wait until morning, but he'd kissed her goodbye and promised to be back for breakfast. They brought him back just after dawn, she whispered, draped over his horse like cargo. Said they found him on the North Trail, but that made no sense. The Branson place is east. Who brought him back? Randall's men, the Burton brothers. Her hands clenched in her lap. They said they were checking their fence line, just happened to find him. Convenient. That's what I thought. But who could I tell? The mayor? The sheriff they appointed to replace Tom is Randall's cousin. The banker? He holds the note on half the small spreads around here, including mine. So you've been out here alone, knowing your husband's killer is free, probably watching you, waiting. His voice held an edge sharp as a blade. That takes courage. Or foolishness. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sometimes I can't tell the difference anymore. They sat in silence, the night sounds wrapping around them. Somewhere close, a barn owl called, and its mate answered from across the valley. "Why did you come here?" Sarah asked finally. "To Cedar Ridge. I mean, it's not exactly on the way to anywhere important." Coulter pulled out a thin cigar, raised an eyebrow in question. When she nodded, he lit it, the flame briefly illuminating his features. "Heard a friend might need help. Tom?" He sent word a month before he died. Said something felt wrong. Asked if I could come when I finished my business in Colorado. He drew on the cigar, the tip glowing red. I was delayed by the time I got here. You came because Tom asked for help. The idea of her straight-laced husband reaching out to an outlaw should have shocked her. Instead, it felt like another piece of a puzzle sliding into place. We had an agreement, made it years ago, last time we rode together. If either of us was ever in real trouble, the kind where the law couldn't or wouldn't help, we'd send word. And you honor agreements with dead men? Especially with dead men. He turned to look at her directly. They can't release you from your promises. Sarah shivered. Though the night wasn't cold, there was something in his voice, a weight that spoke of other ghosts, other debts. "What kind of business in Colorado?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. That's not my concern. You have a right to know who's standing watch." He was quiet for a moment. There was a man who needed killing, a judge who liked to collect things, land, money, people, especially young women who couldn't fight back. And you killed him, eventually. The simple word carried volumes. Sarah thought of the scars she'd glimpsed on his hands, the way he moved like someone accustomed to pain. Is that what you do? Kill men who need killing? Sometimes, when the law fails or looks the other way. He studied the glowing tip of his cigar. Your husband understood that. It's why we remained friends even after he chose his path. He never told me. He was protecting you. The less you knew about his past, the safer you were. Coulter's smile was bitter. Looks like that didn't work out as planned. A coyote yipped in the distance, setting off a chorus of answers. The sound reminded Sarah of how isolated they were, how far from help if trouble came calling. "You should go back inside," Coulter said, standing. "Dawn comes early, and you need rest. What about you? I'll be around. You can't stand guard every night. Watch me." There was iron in his voice, the same tone he'd used with Randall in the saloon. Sarah stood as well, clutching her shawl. "I can't pay you." "Did I ask for payment?" "No, but Tom saved my life once, pulled me out of a burning building when any sensible man would have let me fry." He touched his scar unconsciously. "Some debts can't be settled with money. This isn't your fight. It became mine the moment Tom sent that letter." He started to turn away, then paused. "There's something else. Something you should know." Sarah waited, her heart hammering. "I've seen the books at the bank. Don't ask how. Randall doesn't just hold your note. He's been buying up all the small spread's debts. Every family that might stand with you, he owns their paper. So even if I could prove what happened to Tom, nobody could afford to support you. He's built himself a kingdom here, and you're the last piece that won't fall in line." The full weight of her situation crashed over Sarah like a rock slide. She'd known things were bad, but this was systematic, calculated. Tom hadn't just been murdered. He'd been removed like a chess piece to clear the board. "What am I supposed to do?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Coulter moved back toward her, stopping just close enough that she could see his eyes in the moonlight. "For tonight, lock your doors. Keep Tom's rifle handy and try to sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." "We? You got another partner I don't know about?" "Despite everything," Sarah felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "You're a strange man, Jake Coulter. So I've been told." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Mrs. McKenna." "Sarah," she said impulsively, "if you're going to be standing guard over my home, you should at least call me Sarah." Something shifted in his expression, there and gone like heat lightning. "Good night, Sarah." She watched him walk back into the darkness, disappearing among the sage and shadows like he'd never been there at all. But she knew he was there, somewhere beyond the circle of her lamplight, keeping watch. Inside. She barred the door and checked Tom's rifle, making sure it was loaded and within reach. Then she lay down fully dressed on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling and thinking about promises between dead men and the living who kept them. The wolves howled again, closer now, and Sarah closed her eyes, for the first time in months. She fell asleep without fear, knowing that something far more dangerous than wolves prowled the darkness outside, and that, for now, at least, it was on her side. The wind sang through the gaps in the walls, carrying the scent of sage and coming storm, and in her dreams, she walked through a landscape of scarred hands and gray eyes, where the line between salvation and damnation was thin as moonlight on gunmetal. The news came with the morning milk delivery. Old Miguel, who supplied half the town with dairy, pulled Sarah aside as she collected her jug. His weathered face creased with worry. "Senora McKenna, you must be careful. There are men riding from the south, bad men. They say they look for someone. And Senor Randall, he meets with them last night." Sarah's blood chilled. "What kind of men?" "The kind who sell their guns to whoever pays. I hear one name, Brock Daniels. He rides with 5 others." She knew that name. Everyone west of the Mississippi knew it. Daniels led a gang of former Confederate raiders who'd never stopped fighting their war. Only now they fought for money instead of cause. If Randall had brought them in. Sarah thanked Miguel and hurried inside, her mind racing. She needed to warn Jake, but she hadn't seen him since their conversation 2 nights ago, though she'd felt his presence in the darkness, keeping watch. An hour later, a dust cloud on the horizon announced visitors. Sarah loaded Tom's rifle and positioned herself on the porch, the weapon across her lap. But it wasn't raiders who emerged from the dust. It was a delegation of townspeople, led by Mayor Hutchins and Reverend Carlisle. "Mrs. McKenna," the mayor began, mopping his florid face with a handkerchief. "We've come to discuss your situation." "My situation?" Sarah kept her voice level, though her grip tightened on the rifle. "This association with that outlaw?" Reverend Carlisle said, his thin face pinched with disapproval. "It's causing concern among the good people of Cedar Ridge." "What association?" "The man stopped a drunk from assaulting me." "Since when is that cause for concern?" "He's been seen near your property." The mayor said, "At night. Surely you understand how that looks." Sarah stood slowly, the rifle still in her hands. "What I understand is that my husband was murdered, and not one of you good people has lifted a finger to find his killer. What I understand is that Samuel Randall can threaten me. send his men to harass me, try to steal my land, and you do nothing, but let one man show me a moment's kindness. And suddenly you're concerned about propriety. Now, Sarah, the Reverend started. Mrs. McKenna, she corrected coldly. And I'll thank you to get off my property, unless you've come to arrest Mr. Coulter for some crime, or to finally investigate my husband's death. We have nothing to discuss. The men exchanged glances. Mayor Hutchins cleared his throat. There's talk of calling in federal marshals, a known killer in our town. Then call them, Sarah challenged. Let them come. Maybe they'll be interested in looking into a few other deaths while they're here, like Tom's. The delegation left amid mutters and dark looks. Sarah watched them go, knowing she'd just burned whatever bridges remained between her and the town's protection. But those bridges had been mere illusion anyway, offering no real safety. The storm struck that afternoon, sudden and violent as such storms were in the desert. The sky turned the color of an old bruise, and lightning split the air with a smell of copper and heat. Sarah rushed to secure the animals, fighting wind that tried to tear her clothes from her body. She was struggling with the barn door when strong hands joined hers, and together they wrestled it closed. She turned to find Jake beside her, water streaming from his hat brim. "Where did you come from?" she shouted over the wind. "Does it matter?" He guided her toward the house, his body shielding hers from the worst of the driving sand. Inside, they stood dripping on her clean floor, catching their breath. Jake removed his hat, shaking water from it, and Sarah saw exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. "You haven't slept," she observed. "Sleep's overrated." He moved to the window, checking sightlines out of habit. "You had visitors today. The town fathers, come to warn me about the danger to my reputation." She wrung water from her skirt. "As if my reputation could sink any lower." "It's not your reputation I'm worried about." He turned from the window. "Randall's brought in hired guns, Brock Daniels and his crew. I heard—" Sarah moved to stoke the fire, needing something to do with her hands. "Miguel warned me this morning. You need to leave. Go to family, friends in another town. Wait until—" "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended. "This is my home, Tom's home. I won't be driven off by thugs and threats." "Sarah, would you run?" She faced him, chin raised. "If it were your land, your spouse's memory being dishonored, would you tuck tail and run?" His jaw tightened. "That's different. Because you're a man. Because you can shoot back." She laughed bitterly. "I can shoot too. Tom made sure of that. Shooting targets and shooting men are two different things. You think I don't know that?" Her voice cracked. "You think I haven't imagined it 1,000 times, finding the men who killed Tom, looking them in the eye, and—" Thunder crashed, cutting off her words. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. When the echoes died, Jake had moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "Killing changes you," he said quietly. "Even when it's justified, even when they deserve it. Each time takes a piece of your soul you don't get back." "And how many pieces have you lost?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing a map of scars on his forearm. Bullet wounds, knife marks, burns. Every one of these came with a death, mine or theirs. After a while, "You stop counting the scars. Stop counting the graves." Sarah reached out instinctively, her fingers hovering just above the damaged skin. "These aren't all from fights." "No." The word held weights she couldn't measure. "Some men hurt you because they're enemies, others because they enjoy it. Learned early to tell the difference." She let her hand drop. "Is that why you do it? Kill men who need killing? Because of what was done to you? Maybe. Or maybe I just found the one thing I'm good at." He rolled his sleeve back down. "Either way, it's not a life I'd wish on anyone, especially not on you." The storm raged outside, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of tension built. Sarah was acutely aware of how close they stood, of the heat radiating from his body, the way his presence seemed to fill the small space. "I should check the horses," she said, not moving. They're fine. Barn solid. The chickens then. Sarah. Just her name. But the way he said it stopped her babbling. I need to tell you something. About Daniels and his men. She waited, watching emotions flicker across his face like shadows. I know them. Rode with them once, years ago, before I understood what they really were. His hand moved unconsciously to his gun. There's bad blood between us. When they find out I'm here, they'll come for you. They'll come for both of us. Randall's smarter than I gave him credit. He didn't just hire guns. He hired my past. Sarah moved to the table, sinking into a chair, the full weight of their situation pressed down on her. So we're trapped. If you leave, I'm alone against Randall. If you stay. If I stay, we face them together. He pulled out the other chair, sitting across from her. But I won't make that choice for you. You have a right to know what you're risking. She studied his face, seeing past the scars and hard edges to something else, a loneliness that matched her own, a weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. Tell me about them, she said. Tell me what we're facing. So he did. As the storm battered the cabin, Jake told her about riding with Daniel's crew in the chaos after the war, young and angry and looking for any cause to believe in. How he'd slowly realized they weren't fighting for anything but their own greed, the night he'd tried to leave, and the price they'd made him pay for that defiance. The burns, Sarah said softly, understanding dawning. They don't take desertion lightly. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the old pain beneath. Would have killed me, but I had friends, same ones who pulled me out. Tom was one of them. Tom never said, like I said, he was protecting you, from his past, from mine, from all the shadows that follow men who've lived by the gun. Jake leaned back, the chair creaking. But now those shadows have come calling anyway. Lightning illuminated the room in stark relief, and in that moment, Sarah made her decision. She stood, moving to the cabinet where Tom had kept his guns, along with the rifle. There was a Colt .45 and a box of ammunition. Then we'd better be ready for them, she said, checking the cylinder with hands that barely trembled. Jake watched her with something like wonder. You sure about this? No, she admitted. But I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of waiting for the next blow to fall. She met his gaze steadily. If they're coming anyway, I'd rather face them on my feet than on my knees. Kneel or walk, Jake murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. What? Something my grandmother used to say, Cherokee woman, tough as leather. Said everyone faces that choice eventually. Kneel to your fears or walk through them. And which do you choose? His smile was sharp as a blade. I'm still walking, aren't I? Thunder rolled across the valley again, and Sarah felt something shift between them. A partnership forged in desperation and defiance, sealed by the storm. Then we walked together, she said, and meant it. Outside. The wind howled like all the demons of the desert. But inside the small cabin, two damaged souls found something they'd thought lost forever. Someone else willing to stand against the darkness. No matter the cost, the storm would pass, as all storms did. But what was building between them would prove far more dangerous than any weather, and far more enduring than either dared to hope. The memory came to Sarah in the quiet hour before dawn, when Jake dozed in the chair by her fireplace and the world held its breath between night and day. She stood at the window, watching the first pale light touch the mountains, and let herself remember what she'd tried so hard to forget. Tom's last morning. The way he'd lingered over breakfast, unlike him who usually wolfed down food like a man afraid someone might steal his plate. How he'd kissed her twice at the door, then come back for a third. The strange sadness in his eyes when he'd said, Whatever happens, Sarah, know that I love you, always have, always will. She teased him about being maudlin. Now those words haunted her like smoke from a cold fire. Can't sleep? Jake's voice, rough with exhaustion. Just thinking. She didn't turn from the window. The night Tom died, he left something for me. Said if anything happened, I should look in his old war chest. I haven't been able to. She felt rather than heard Jake rise, his footsteps soft on the plank floor. Might be time. Sarah nodded slowly. The chest sat in the bedroom, covered with a quilt she'd made in the first year of their marriage, when the future had seemed certain as sunrise. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid, revealing the remnants of Tom's former life. His cavalry uniform, a few medals, letters tied with string. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather journal. His deputy record book, Sarah said, recognizing it. But why would he? She opened it, finding Tom's neat script filling pages of routine reports. But toward the back, the entries changed, became personal notes, observations. Her breath caught as she read. Randall's bringing in more men, not regular cowboys, gun hands, building himself an army. She turned pages with trembling fingers. Caught the Burton boys with running irons, changing brands. When I confronted them, they laughed, said I'd better mind my own business if I knew what was good for me. Jake read over her shoulder, his presence steady as stone. He was building a case. Here. Sarah pointed to an entry dated a week before Tom's death. Meeting with Judge Harper next week. Have enough evidence to bring federal marshals in. Randall's empire is built on stolen cattle and murdered homesteaders. Found where they buried Jim Watson after he refused to sell. Sarah doesn't know. Better that way. The journal slipped from her numb fingers. Jim Watson had been their neighbor, a widower with 3 children. He'd supposedly left for California suddenly, selling his spread to Randall for a fraction of its worth. His children. Oh, God, Sarah whispered. The Watson children. Randall sent them to that orphanage in Fort Worth. Said their father wanted them cared for. We all believed him. Easy to believe what's convenient. Jake's voice held no judgment. Harder to face what's true. Sarah kept reading. Each entry another stone in the wall of evidence Tom had built. Rustled cattle, intimidated families. Suspicious deaths ruled accidents. And through it all, Randall's hand pulling strings, building his kingdom on blood and fear. The final entry was dated the night Tom died. Randall knows, don't know how, but he knows. Tried to buy me off today. When that didn't work, threatened Sarah. Can't wait for Harper now. Riding out to the Branson place tonight, got word their fence was cut, cattle scattered. Probably a trap. But if I don't go, they'll hit the Bransons hard. Maybe I can catch them in the act, force things into the open. If something happens to me, Sarah will find this. She's stronger than she knows. Always has been. Sarah closed the journal. Tears she hadn't known were falling dripping onto the leather cover. All this time, she'd thought Tom had been caught unaware. But he'd known. He'd ridden out knowing it was likely a trap. Choosing duty over safety. Stubborn fool, she whispered. Noble, brave, stubborn fool. He was protecting everyone else. Jake said quietly. The Bransons, the other small ranchers, you, man like that, couldn't do different, and it killed him. No, Randall killed him. Tom just refused to kneel. Sarah looked up at Jake, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. You understand, more than you know. He moved to the window, checking the approaching dawn. Question is, what do we do with this? Journal's evidence, but Judge Harper's dead. Supposed hunting accident last month. New judge is Randall's man through and through. So we're back where we started. Not quite. Now we know what Tom knew. That's power if we use it right. Sarah stood, wiping her eyes with fierce determination. Then we use it. Tom gathered this evidence to protect people. I won't let it go to waste. The sun broke the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, as if summoned by the light. Dust clouds appeared in the distance. Riders, moving fast, moving. Jake's hand went to his gun. Get the rifle. Company's coming. But it wasn't Daniels and his gang. It was the Bransons, Carl and his eldest boy, both looking haggard. Their horses were lathered with sweat, evidence of hard riding. Mrs. McKenna, Carl called before they'd even dismounted. Thank God you're all right. We heard—" He stopped, seeing Jake. His hand twitched toward his sidearm. "It's fine, Carl," Sarah said quickly. "What's happened?" The rancher's weathered face was grim. "Randall's men hit the Hendricks place last night. Burned them out. Family barely escaped with their lives. Dear Lord, is anyone hurt? Little Emma got burned some, but she'll heal. They're at our place now, along with the Millers. Randall gave them all the same message. Sell to him or burn." Jake stepped forward. "How many families are left? Besides you and Mrs. McKenna?" Carl studied him warily. "Maybe 6, if you count the Mexican family south of the creek. But we can't fight Randall. He's got 30 men, plus whatever guns he's bringing in. You can't fight him divided." Jake corrected. "Together's a different story. You're talking about war. I'm talking about survival." Jake's voice was flat. "War's already here. Question is whether you'll fight it or just die in it." Sarah retrieved Tom's journal. "Carl, there's something you need to see. Something Tom discovered before he died." They sat around her kitchen table as the rancher read, his face growing darker with each page. His son, barely 17, read over his shoulder, fists clenching as the truth emerged. "Jim Watson," Carl breathed. "We hunted together. His kids called me Uncle Carl. And Randall. That bastard killed him." "Among others," Sarah said quietly. "Tom was gathering evidence to bring in federal marshals. They killed him for it." "Pa!" the boy said, voice shaking with rage. "We can't let this stand." Carl closed the journal slowly. No, we can't." He looked at Jake. "You're the one folks are talking about. The gunfighter." "I am. Why should we trust you? No offense, but hired killers ain't exactly known for their community spirit." Jake smiled thinly. "You shouldn't trust me, but you can trust this. Randall hired my enemies to kill me. That makes us allies, whether we like it or not." "Enemy of my enemy," Carl muttered. He stood. "Decision made. I'll gather the others, those still willing to fight. We'll meet at the old mission tonight, after dark. Be careful," Sarah warned. "Randall has eyes everywhere. Let him watch." Carl's eyes were hard as flint. Time for hiding is over. After the Bransons left, Sarah and Jake prepared for what was coming. They cleaned weapons, counted ammunition, reinforced the shutters. As they worked, Sarah found herself stealing glances at Jake, studying the way he moved, the careful efficiency of his preparations. "What?" he asked, catching her looking. "I'm trying to understand you," she admitted. "This isn't your fight, not really. You could leave, face Daniels somewhere else." "Could I?" He set down the rifle he'd been cleaning. "Tell me, Sarah, where would I go that the past doesn't follow? What town would welcome me where men like Randall don't rule? There must be somewhere. Maybe, but I'm tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder." He met her gaze. "And maybe I found something worth standing still for." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't look away. "Jake." "I know." His voice was rough. "Wrong time, wrong place, wrong man, but knowing doesn't change what is." She moved without thinking, crossing the space between them. Her hand found his scarred cheek, thumb tracing the line of old pain. "You're not the wrong man. You're the only one who came." He caught her hand, held it against his face for a moment that stretched like honey in the sun. Then, gently, he stepped back. "Don't make me into something I'm not. Sarah, I'm no hero. Just a killer who sometimes points his gun at the right people. Tom thought you were worth saving, worth trusting." She let her hand fall but held his gaze. "That's good enough for me." Evening painted the desert purple and gold as they prepared to leave for the mission. Sarah strapped on Tom's gun belt, the weight foreign but steadying. Jake watched her with something like pride. "Remember," he said, "if shooting starts, stay low. Aim center mass. Don't hesitate." She managed a wry smile. Tom was a good teacher. He was good at a lot of things. They mounted up as darkness fell, 2 figures against the dying light. as they rode toward the old mission and whatever waited there. Sarah found herself thinking about Tom's final entry. She's stronger than she knows. Maybe he'd been right. Maybe strength wasn't about not being afraid. It was about saddling up anyway, choosing to walk when kneeling would be easier. And maybe, just maybe, finding someone willing to walk beside you made all the difference. The mission bells had long since fallen silent, but tonight they would ring again, not with celebration, but with the gathering of desperate souls ready to make their stand. The riders came with the dawn, 6 shadows against the blood-red sky. Brock Daniels rode at their head, his face carved from granite and hate, the kind of man who smiled widest when dealing death. They approached from the south, where the canyon walls narrowed into a natural funnel, exactly where Jake had said they would. Sarah lay flat on the ridge above, Tom's rifle steady in her hands, watching through the morning haze as the gang picked their way through the rocks. Jake was somewhere to her left, invisible among the boulders, waiting for the perfect moment. The confrontation at the mission the night before had galvanized the remaining families. 17 men had shown up, along with a handful of women who refused to be left behind. They'd listened to Tom's evidence, seen the pattern of murder and theft laid bare. By midnight, they'd had a plan, not to wait for Randall's next move, but to force his hand. Let them come to us. Jake had said, in terrain we choose, on our terms. Now, watching Daniels approach, Sarah understood the wisdom of it. The canyon was a trap. Walls too steep to climb quickly, too narrow to maneuver. If the gang tried to retreat. A whistle, low and mournful like a dove's call. Jake's signal. Sarah sighted down the rifle, picking her target, a thick-set man riding behind Daniels. Someone she didn't recognize, but who carried himself like trouble. The first shot came from Jake's position, the crack echoing off canyon walls like thunder. Daniel's horse screamed and went down, spilling its rider into the dust. Then everything erupted at once. Sarah squeezed the trigger, felt the rifle buck against her shoulder. Her target jerked, clutched his arm, but stayed mounted. She worked the lever, fired again. This time seeing him topple backward off his horse. Bullets whined off rocks, filled the air with deadly hornets. The gang had dismounted, taking cover behind scattered boulders, returning fire with practiced efficiency. These weren't common outlaws. They were killers, veterans of a dozen such fights. "Sarah, move!" Jake's voice, urgent. She rolled sideways just as bullets chewed up the ground where she'd been. Scrambling behind a larger rock, she caught her breath, hands shaking now that the initial rush had passed. This was nothing like shooting targets or even hunting game. These men were shooting back, trying to kill her. From her new position, she could see the Branson men had joined the fight from the north end of the canyon. Carl and his boy were working in tandem, one firing while the other reloaded, keeping the gang pinned down. But Daniels was rallying his men, using hand signals to coordinate their response. Sarah saw 2 of them working their way up the slope, trying to flank Jake's position. No time to think. She shifted her aim, led the climbing men, fired. One stumbled, slid back down, the other dove for cover, but now Jake knew they were there. His rifle spoke twice, and the threat was ended. "Behind you!" The shout came from Miguel's son, positioned on the opposite ridge. Sarah spun to see one of the gang had somehow circled around, was climbing toward her position. Their eyes met across 20 yards of broken rock, cold killer's eyes, in a face marked by violence. Sarah's rifle came up, but he was already drawing his pistol, faster than thought. Time slowed to honey. She could see his finger tightening on the trigger, knew she wouldn't be fast enough. The shot came from below. The outlaw spun, his bullet going wild, then tumbled down the slope in a cascade of loose stone. Jake stood at the canyon floor, smoke rising from his Colt, already turning to face new threats. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then, suddenly, Daniels's voice cut through the gunfire. "Coulter! Jake Coulter! I know you're up there! You treacherous bastard!" The shooting slowed, then stopped. leaving an eerie silence broken only by the moaning of wounded men. "Come on down. Jake," Daniels continued. "Let's finish what we started in Amarillo. Just you and me. Or are you hiding behind farmers' wives now?" Sarah's anger flared hot. She started to rise, but a hand on her ankle stopped her. Jake had climbed up to her position, moving silent as smoke. "Don't," he said quietly. "He's trying to draw us out." 8 years. "Jake," Daniels shouted. 8 years I've been carrying these scars you gave me. Time to pay up." Jake's face was stone. "Keep the others back," he told Sarah. "No matter what happens." "Jake, no!" But he was already moving, sliding down the slope with that dangerous grace. He emerged onto the canyon floor, hands loose at his sides, coat pushed back to clear his holsters. "Hello, Brock," he said, voice carrying in the morning air. "Still ugly, I see." Daniels stepped out from cover, and Sarah bit back a gasp. The left side of his face was a ruin of scar tissue, eye milky white and blind. Jake's work, she realized. The price of leaving the gang. "You took my face," Daniels snarled. "My eye, my men. You took my freedom. Called it even." "Even?" Daniels laughed, an ugly sound. "You killed 3 of my best men getting free, left me for dead in a burning building. That ain't even. That's a debt that needs settling." They circled each other like wary wolves, neither man's hand moving toward their guns yet. Sarah kept her rifle trained on the other outlaws, but they seemed content to watch. Honor among thieves demanding a fair fight. "Randall paying you well?" Jake asked, still circling. "Well enough, though killing you is what they call a bonus. And after, you'll help him burn out families, murder innocents? Work is work," Daniels shrugged. "Though that pretty widow up there might be worth keeping alive for a while." "She yours?" Randall said she might be. Sarah saw Jake's shoulders tense. The first emotion he'd shown. "Leave her out of this." "Oh, touched a nerve. Did I?" Daniels grinned, horrible with his ruined face. "Tell you what, after I kill you, I'll take real good care of her. Show her what a real man." Jake drew. It was faster than sight, faster than thought. One moment his hands were empty. The next his Colt was out and speaking. Once, twice, 3 times. The shots so close they sounded like one extended roar. Daniels stumbled back, looking down at the spreading red on his chest with something like surprise. His gun was only halfway out of its holster. He tried to complete the draw, managed to get it clear, but his strength was already fading. "Still, fast," he wheezed, dropping to his knees. "Damn you, Coulter." "Yeah," Jake said quietly. "Damn me." Daniels fell forward into the dust and was still. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of the surviving gang members called out, "We're done here. Let us collect our dead and go." Jake looked up at Sarah, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. "Take them and get out." Jake said, "Any of you show your faces in this valley again, we'll bury you here." The outlaws emerged slowly, keeping their hands visible. They loaded their dead onto horses, helped their wounded mount up. As they prepared to leave, one turned back, a younger man with intelligent eyes. "This ain't over," he said. "Randall's still got coin, and there's plenty more who'll take it. Then they'll die too." Jake replied simply. The gang rode out, leaving dust and blood behind. As soon as they were gone, the canyon erupted in whoops and celebration. The Branson boy actually threw his hat in the air. Sarah made her way down to Jake, finding him reloading his Colt with mechanical precision. His hands were steady, but she could see the cost in his eyes. Another ghost to carry, another piece of soul spent. "You all right?" she asked softly. "I'm alive." He holstered the gun. "That's about all I can claim." Carl Branson approached, respect replacing his earlier wariness. "That was, I've never seen anything like that. Hope you never do again." Jake looked around at the gathered ranchers. This was just the first wave. Randall won't stop now. He can't afford to. "Then what do we do?" someone asked. Jake's smile was sharp as winter wind. "We take the fight to him. Tonight, while he's off balance, before he can hire more guns. Attack Randall directly, that's suicide." "No," Sarah said. understanding dawning. It's justice. Tom gathered evidence, but courts won't help us. So we become the law. She held up Tom's journal. Everything's in here, where Randall keeps his records, which of his men are wanted elsewhere, where the bodies are buried, literally. We hit him with truth and bullets both. The group exchanged uncertain looks. These were farmers and ranchers, not warriors, but they were also survivors, pushed to the edge and finding steel they didn't know they had. I'm in, Carl said firmly. For Jim Watson, for Tom McKenna, for all of them. One by one, the others agreed. As they made plans, Sarah noticed Jake standing apart, watching the horizon where Daniel's gang had disappeared. She moved to his side. Thank you, she said simply. For what? Bringing more death to your door? For standing when you could have run? For facing your past? She touched his arm gently. For keeping your promise to Tom? He looked down at her, and something shifted in those gray eyes, a warmth breaking through winter ice. It's not done yet. No, she agreed, but we're still walking. He almost smiled at that. Yeah, still walking. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning shadows. Tonight would bring more violence, more choices between kneeling and walking. But for now, in this moment of victory, Sarah allowed herself to hope. They'd won the first battle. The war for Cedar Ridge, and for their souls, was just beginning. Dawn painted the desert crimson, as if the earth itself bled for what was to come. Sarah stood beside Jake on the rise overlooking Randall's ranch, watching the massive compound stir to life. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, and men moved between buildings like ants preparing for war. 40 men, maybe more, Jake murmured, field glasses pressed to his eyes. He's pulled in every hand from his line camps. He knows we're coming, Sarah said. Good. Scared men make mistakes. Behind them, their ragtag army prepared. 19 souls in all, ranchers, farmers, a few vaqueros from south of the creek who'd lost family to Randall's expansion. Not nearly enough for a frontal assault, but Jake had other plans. Remember? He addressed the group, voice carrying in the still morning air. We're not trying to wipe them out. We need Randall alive to confess, to sign documents returning stolen land. Dead men tell no tales and sign no papers. Carl Branson checked his rifle for the 10th time. And if he won't confess, he will, Sarah said quietly, touching the journal in her saddlebag. When he sees what we know, realizes his empire is already crumbling, he'll deal. Jake studied the compound layout once more. Miguel, your boys take the east approach. Set fire to the hay barn when you hear the first shots. Nothing spreads panic like fire. Carl, you and yours cover the north. Keep them from retreating to the hills. I'll take the main house with me, Sarah interrupted. Sarah? This is about Tom. About justice for my husband. I'm going in. Their eyes met. A silent battle of wills. Jake must have seen something immovable in her gaze because he nodded slowly. Stay close. Do exactly as I say. The attack began at full daylight, the sun at their backs blinding any defenders looking east. Jake and Sarah approached through the orchards, using the fruit trees as cover. Behind them, spread in a wide arc, the others moved into position. The first shot came from the north, Carl's signal. Immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple positions, creating the illusion of a larger force. Men poured from the bunkhouse, confused, shouting, trying to locate threats that seemed to come from everywhere. Then the hay barn exploded in flames, Miguel's boys having done their work. The fire spread to the equipment shed, sending black smoke billowing across the compound. In the chaos, Jake and Sarah slipped through the confusion like ghosts. They reached the main house's back entrance just as Samuel Randall emerged from the front, shouting orders, trying to rally his men. Jake kicked in the kitchen door, moving through the house with practiced efficiency. Sarah close behind. Randall's office was where Tom's journal said it would be. Second floor, facing north. The door was locked, but Jake's boot solved that problem. Inside, a massive safe dominated one wall. Can you open it? Sarah asked. Don't need to. Jake moved to the desk, rifling through papers. Man like Randall keeps his current business close at hand. Here. He held up a leather ledger, pages filled with meticulous records. Sarah scanned them quickly, her stomach turning. Every theft, every murder, recorded like inventory. The Watson family farm, purchased for $200 after owner's disappearance. The Hendricks place, acquired after unfortunate fire. Tom's name with a notation. Sheriff problem resolved, $500 to Burton Brothers. He wrote it all down. She breathed. The arrogant fool documented everything. Pride goeth before the fall. Jake moved to the window, checking the battle outside. Time to go. We've got what we... The door burst open. Randall stood there, pistol in hand, face twisted with rage. Drop the guns, now! Jake's hand twitched toward his holster, but Randall pressed the barrel against Sarah's temple before he could complete the draw. I said drop them. Easy, Jake said, raising his hand slowly. No need for anyone else to die. No need. Randall laughed wildly. You've destroyed everything. Years of work, building this empire. And you, his eyes focused on Sarah. This is your fault. You and your sanctimonious husband. Couldn't just take the money and leave like sensible folks. You murdered him, Sarah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded with a gun to her head. I gave him a choice. Same one I gave all of them. Kneel or die. He chose poorly. No, Jake said quietly. He chose to walk. Randall's attention shifted to Jake for just an instant. It was enough. Sarah drove her elbow back into his ribs, twisting away as the gun discharged, the bullet whining past her ear. Jake's Colt appeared in his hand like magic, but Sarah was already moving, Tom's pistol clearing leather. 2 shots, so close they sounded as one. Randall staggered back, looking down at the spreading red on his white shirt. 1 wound from Jake, 1 from Sarah. The pistol fell from nerveless fingers. You! He collapsed against the door frame, sliding down to sit on the floor. You shot me, both of you. Sarah kept her gun trained on him, though she could see the life fading from his eyes. Where are the other bodies? Jim Watson, the Martinez family, all the others you killed? Randall coughed, blood speckling his lips. Canyon, Devil's Canyon. Dump them all. His breath rattled. Doesn't matter now. I'm dying. Sign this first. Jake produced a paper from the desk. A confession. Hastily written but legal enough. Return the stolen land to the rightful heirs. Go to hell. Jake knelt beside him. Voice conversational. Your gut shot. Randall, that's a slow, painful death. Hours of agony. Or I can end it quick. Clean. Your choice. Sarah watched the war play across Randall's face. Pride against pain. Defiance against the creeping cold already claiming his extremities. Finally, with shaking hand, he signed, There, he gasped. Satisfied? Tom McKenna was a good man, Sarah said quietly. He deserved better than a backshooter's bullet. We all deserve better than we get. Randall's eyes were glazing. Do it. Jake looked at Sarah. She nodded, turning away. A single shot echoed through the room, then silence. Outside, the battle was winding down. With their leader dead and the ranch burning, Randall's hired guns were surrendering or fleeing. Sarah emerged from the house to find Carl Branson organizing the survivors, disarming prisoners, tending wounded. It's done, she announced, holding up the ledger and signed confession. Randall's dead. The land goes back to the rightful owners. A ragged cheer went up, but it was muted by exhaustion and loss. 3 of their own had fallen in the fight. Good men who'd never see their families again. Victory, Sarah was learning, always came with a price. As the sun climbed toward noon, they worked to restore order. The fire was contained. Prisoners secured. Wounded tended. The federal marshals would have to be summoned. The whole mess explained. But with Randall's own records as evidence, justice might actually be served. Sarah found Jake by the corral, saddling his black horse. Her heart sank. You're leaving. Job's done. Randall's dead. Your land is safe. Tom's been avenged. He didn't look at her. Time I moved on. To where? Does it matter? There's always another town, another Randall. Men like me, we don't get to stop walking. Maybe you could, she said carefully. Maybe you could try standing still, just for a while. He turned then, and she saw the war in his eyes, hope against habit, want against wisdom. Sarah, I know what you are, she said quickly. I know what you've done, but I also know who you are. The man who kept his promise to a dead friend, the man who stood against evil when it would have been easier to ride on. That doesn't wash the blood off my hands. No, but maybe it means you can choose what to do with those hands going forward. She moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Stay, help me rebuild. Help make this valley what Tom dreamed it could be. And when my past comes calling again, because it will, men like me don't get clean slates. Then we'll face it together. She touched his scarred cheek gently. I'm tired of being alone, Jake, tired of being afraid. With you, I remember what it feels like to be strong. He caught her hand, held it against his face. You were always strong. You just needed reminding. So remind me, every day, stay. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Jake smiled, a real smile, not the sharp blade he usually showed the world. All right, I'll try. No promises how long I can manage it, but I'll try. Sarah kissed him then, standing in the dust and smoke of victory, surrounded by the wreckage of Randall's empire. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Too much blood had been spilled, too much lost. But it was a beginning. And after everything, that was miracle enough. Carl Branson approached, clearing his throat. Mrs. McKenna, we need to send someone to Fort Worth for the marshals. And there's the matter of the bodies in Devil's Canyon. Sarah pulled back from Jake, squaring her shoulders. There was work to be done, justice to be finished, a community to rebuild. But she wasn't facing it alone anymore. Let's get started, she said, and meant more than just the immediate tasks. As the sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows across the desert, Sarah McKenna stood tall. She had chosen to walk through her grief, through her fear, through the fire of violence and into whatever came next, and beside her stood a man who understood that choice, who had made it himself 1,000 times. Together, they would walk into the uncertain future, building something new from the ashes of the old. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But for the first time since Tom's death, Sarah believed it was possible. The desert wind swept through the valley, carrying away the smoke and dust, leaving clean air and endless sky. And in that moment, with Jake's hand in hers and hope rising like dawn in her chest, Sarah knew Tom would have approved. She had not knelt. She had walked, and she would keep walking. No matter what came, the recovery was slow, measured in small victories and quiet moments. Jake's wounds healed gradually under Sarah's careful tending, each day bringing back a little more strength, a little more hope. The cabin that had once echoed with loneliness now held the gentle sounds of 2 lives intertwining, morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, evening conversations by the fire, the soft rhythm of breathing in the dark. 3 weeks after the battle at Randall's ranch, federal marshals had come and gone, taking statements and evidence. The signed confession, combined with Tom's journal and Randall's own meticulous records, painted a clear picture of years of corruption and murder. Properties were being returned to rightful heirs or their survivors. And slowly, Cedar Ridge began to heal. Sarah stood on her porch, watching Jake work with a young horse in the corral. His movements were still careful. The bullet wound in his side protested sudden motion, but there was a peace in his face she'd never seen before. The constant vigilance had softened, though never fully disappeared. Old habits died hard for men who'd lived by the gun. You keep staring like that, you'll burn a hole through me, he called without turning around. She smiled. Just making sure you're real. Still half expect to wake up and find you've ridden off. He secured the horse and walked to the fence, that slight hitch in his stride the only sign of his injury. Told you I'd try to stay still. Been managing 3 weeks now. A record, I'm sure. Close to it. His expression grew serious. Sarah, there's something we need to talk about. Her heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. If you're about to tell me you're leaving. No. He climbed through the fence rails, approaching her with purpose. The opposite. From his pocket, he pulled out a simple gold band. Not new. It showed the wear of years, the patina of history. This was my mother's, one of the few things I've kept through everything. Never thought I'd have use for it, but he met her eyes. Sarah McKenna, you've already walked through fire with me. Would you consider walking a little further? As my wife. The world seemed to stop. Sarah stared at the ring, at Jake's scarred hands holding it, at the hope and fear warring in his gray eyes. Jake Coulter, she said softly. Are you proposing to me? Doing a poor job of it seems like... A rueful smile touched his lips. I'm better with guns than words. What I'm trying to say is, I love you. Have since you stood up to me that night on your porch, refusing to be afraid. You make me want to be better than I am, to build something instead of just tearing down. I know I'm not what you deserve, but... Sarah silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her answer into the touch. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, she held out her left hand. Yes, she said simply. Yes, to all of it. To you, to us, to whatever comes next. The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had always belonged there. Jake pulled her close, and they stood together on the porch where Tom had once stood, where she'd kept lonely vigil, where everything had changed. Tom would approve, she said into his shoulder. He always said I was too stubborn to stay down long. He knew you well. Jake pressed a kiss to her hair. Probably knew this would happen. Bringing me here. Man always was too clever for his own good. They were married a week later in the little church in Cedar Ridge. Carl Branson standing as witness. The townspeople who attended were still wary of Jake, but they'd seen what he'd done for them, how he'd bled for their freedom. Time would ease the rest. Martha, the minister's wife who'd once counseled Sarah to accept Randall's protection, now fussed over her dress and flowers. You look radiant, dear, she said, seemingly having forgotten her earlier disapproval. Simply radiant. Sarah caught Jake's eye as he waited at the altar, saw him fighting not to laugh. She'd learned he had a wicked sense of humor hidden beneath all that dangerous stillness, emerging more each day as he settled into this new life. Dearly beloved, Reverend Carlyle began, and Sarah let the words wash over her. Through the church windows, she could see the desert stretching endless under a brilliant blue sky. Somewhere out there, Tom rested in the cemetery on the hill. She'd visited that morning, leaving wildflowers and a quiet promise that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. I now pronounce you man and wife. Jake's kiss was gentle, mindful of their audience, but his eyes promised more for later. As they walked back down the aisle, Sarah noticed several of Randall's former victims in attendance. The Hendricks family, rebuilding after the fire. Young Emma with healing scars but bright eyes. The Watson children, brought back from Fort Worth to reclaim their father's land. This was what victory really looked like. Not the gunfight's dramatic climax, but the quiet work of putting lives back together. The reception was held at the Branson Ranch, tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every family in the valley. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold, Jake and Sarah swayed to the fiddle music, lost in their own world. Any regrets? She asked. Just one. At her alarmed look, he continued, I wish I'd gotten here sooner. Wish I could have saved Tom, prevented all this pain. You can't change the past. Jake, believe me, I've tried wishing it different 1,000 times. She laid her head on his shoulder. But if things had been different, would we have found each other? Would you have stayed? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I needed to see you fight, to understand what real strength looks like. Maybe we both needed to walk through that darkness to find this light. The music ended, but they kept swaying, unwilling to let go. Around them, the community they'd helped save celebrated into the night, children playing, adults sharing stories and laughter, the sounds of life returning to normal. "What now?" Sarah asked. "Do we just be farmers, raise horses, and grow old together?" Jake chuckled. "That's the plan, though knowing our luck, it won't be that simple. My past has a way of catching up, and there's always someone else's fight to get pulled into. Then we'll face it together." She pulled back to look at him. "Whatever comes, outlaws, drought, boring Sunday socials, we handle it together." "Together," he agreed, and sealed it with another kiss. Later, as they rode back to their cabin under a canopy of stars, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here, from widow to warrior to wife, all in the span of a few violent months. The desert had tested them with fire and blood, and they'd emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. Jake helped her down from the wagon, and she paused at the threshold of the cabin. "Welcome home, Mr. Coulter. After you, Mrs. Coulter." The name sent a thrill through her. Not a betrayal of Tom's memory, but a continuation of the life he'd wanted for her, one of strength and love and possibility. Inside, lamplight cast dancing shadows on familiar walls. But everything felt different now, charged with promise. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Two damaged souls choosing to build something new from the ashes of their pasts. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The ranch needed work. The community still bore scars that would take years to fully heal. And somewhere out there, the shadows of Jake's past waited. But tonight, with her husband's arms around her and their whole future stretching ahead like an unwritten page, Sarah McKenna Coulter felt something she'd thought lost forever. Peace. The desert wind sang through the gaps in the walls, but now it sounded like a lullaby rather than a lament, and outside, under the vast western sky, the stars bore witness to a love forged in gunfire and tempered by choice. The choice to keep walking when kneeling would have been easier, to reach for light when darkness seemed safer, to trust when trust seemed impossible. In the wild heart of Texas, two people who'd lost everything had found in each other a reason to keep fighting, keep hoping, keep walking toward whatever dawn awaited. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed Sarah and Jake's story of love, loss, and redemption, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories. And share your thoughts about which part of the story touched you most. Until next time, keep walking tall, partners.